that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello, everybody. Not the norm, but I've been really into Assassin's Creed lately. So I decided to watch a movie that came out when I was 4, same year as Revenge of the Sith, which was a 2005 film, Kingdom of Heaven, by Ridley Scott. The director's cut, though, specifically. And, you know, it has been such a long time since this movie came out that a lot of you may not have even heard of it. It is a movie that takes place during the Crusades. Ridley Scott is a known atheist and very secular, so there's definitely some harshening of what is already a tough situation with the Crusades with the Christians. It's fairly nuanced, but you will also see some softening of the Muslim actions during that time. Because it's definitely in that favor, which is fine. It's just not accurate to history. Both sides were very, very bad to one another. So that is very much softened on the Muslim side. But I think it still holds a lot of weight. It is a very powerful film, but you have to watch a director's cut because scrubbed for time, they forced the film to be 2 hours and a half when it originally came to theaters, and that's why it's not a classic or well-known like Gladiator or anything. It's kind of just been left in history because it wasn't well received, and that's because it wasn't allowed to have that full 3 hours and a half like we see with, like, wasn't Doom Part 2 close to that? But I really think if the director's cut was just put in theaters, it would have been much more well received, and we'd still be talking about it today because it's a really good film, despite all that. Is it one of the best films I've ever seen? Probably not, but it's really good. And one of the few stories we actually have set during the Crusades. I mean, we have a lot of fantasy books, right, that are Crusades inspired. You know, you could look at The Way of Adan by Philip Chase. You could look at the Prince of Nothing series. I'm sure there's more things like that. I'm sure there's a couple. I mean, I've looked for shows. I've yet to see any because I'm finishing up Black Sails and wanted more historical fiction. But you don't see much of that for the Crusades. There's a lot of documentaries and stuff, but not a lot of films or TV shows based on that premise alone. And then you, of course, have Assassin's Creed 1, where you are playing as an assassin, which is not on the side of the Templars. So that's fun. But it has such a stark cast. I mean, you got Jeremy Irons in there. You got Liam Neeson. You got Legolas, Orlando Bloom. I forget the guy's name, but the guy from Twilight and Good Omens. I forget his name, but not David Tennant, the other one. So that's pretty cool. You even have an uncredited role, Edward Norton, which is just crazy to me, because he nails the performance as King Baldwin, the leprosy king. And all of it, you know, it's a really engaging film. And despite the fact that it comes from a secular lens, I think it still shines a lot of nuance on religion or faith, from the Muslims to the Christians. I mean, Baldwin is treated with such reverence, and so is the leader of the Muslim. Is it Saladin? I forget. I don't want to butcher it. But it's those two characters are acted and handled extremely well for the nuance that Ridley Scott was going for. And I definitely think it's a bit of a critique on religion, but not necessarily a critique on faith, which is a very similar thing that, again, Philip Chase did with his Way of Adan books. So I think it was an interesting exploration. It's something worth going back and checking out. I mean, you can only get the original cut, which I don't recommend on YouTube. Don't do that. There are plenty of places where you don't have to pay for to get the director's cut, or you can just buy the director's cut on like Amazon or something if you're that invested into doing so. But I do think it's something worth watching. And I decided to share it with you today because of that. Um, but yeah, I guess I don't have too much more other to say. But it's worth watching. Hopefully, you give it a shot. I'm getting spoilers if you don't want any. Now it's time to go. You know, this movie is as old as me. Oh, a little bit younger, but you get it. Anyway, the very beginning, we have a woman who committed suicide. She had a baby inside of her. This is the main character, played by Orlando Bloom's wife and child. Now, the priest tells the men to cut up the woman's head, which is a no-no because he's, in this sense, again, I don't know where this belief comes from. It's nowhere in the Bible. It is church tradition, I suppose. But he basically is trying to get her to go to hell because there's this idea that if you cut off a head, that it cannot obtain, or any like limb, if you've severed its way to paradise, I suppose. Also, because it's a sin to kill yourself, right? Christendom has done many things Christ would be ashamed of. There's something that one of the characters said. I forgot the other character. I forget the actor's name, but he was the professor from Prisoner of Azkaban film, and he plays the teacher that turns into a werewolf. Professor Lumen or something like that. But I thought that was a very impactful line because I think that's very much true. Westboro Baptist Church with throwing rocks at gay graves, or think about the Crusades themselves to an extent. We have a lot of examples. We don't need to go into all of them, but I'm sure you can name plenty. But again, this is where you have to, and I'm not trying to get preachy, but you look at what the religion actually teaches as opposed to what its followers do, right? Like, if I start a religion that says, like, everybody gets to eat ice cream and is happy, go fun, and you got somebody stabbing you in the neck in the name of my ice cream god, well, even if my god's fake, clearly they're not following the tenets of their scripture, right? They're doing their own thing. They may justify later in the name, be like, well, in the circumstance, but they're going against what the book says. So, we have what the Bible says. You can take that or leave that. But in terms of what you see a lot of times with Christians, remember that Christians are fallible, that Christians are sinful. You don't have to believe in sin, but every human is flawed and imperfect, right? So you can't judge a religion or faith or belief based off of what its followers do. Certainly doesn't help the PR, but you have to do it based on what the book actually teaches. You're going to judge it. Anyway, Liam Neeson, we get his name later, which is Godfrey, but like a little bit later into the film. So Godfrey, he has no legitimate heir. He's like a minor lord, but he does have a bastard son, who is Legolas, or Orlando Bloom, who we also learn later on his name is Balin. Something interesting to learn about Balin is that he's a very mild-tempered person. He always turns the other cheek. He's a non-violent person. Again, the original cut of the film is hurt. It happened again. The original cut of the film was hurt by this. But if you look, because the film cuts up scenes that are relevant, but you have the priest who apparently is like, I guess this guy's Balin's stepbrother or something. But he's like, you never get mad at anything. He starts like slapping him and hitting him, and Balin just doesn't do anything. Balin seems like the type of person that kind of like bottles a lot of things in and tells it to God, because he is a man of faith. But he tries not to lash out, because Jesus said to turn the other cheek. So he takes in a lot, and I kind of relate because in a very, very much the same way, like I try so hard, especially when it's not with family, I hold a lot in, but it's also a problem because then a lot of that comes out at home. Not like I beat anybody or anything, but I'll have a lot less patience because I've used it all up at work or just outside in general. But these scenes are important, which is so bad that it was taken out of the original cut, because then later on, the priest brother, whatever the hell he is, admits that he cut off his wife's head on purpose just so she would go to hell for sure. Oh my goodness. And that she'd have no opportunity to reach heaven. And in that moment, it was like it's just the final straw. So Balin basically stabs the priest and runs off with his father Godfrey, because there's this idea that if he goes to Jerusalem, he can cleanse his sins and cleanse his wife's sins in so doing, and so that she can go to heaven. And so that's what he believes. So he goes, plus he just murdered someone, so he's going to be in trouble if he sticks around. So, but again, another reason why this film didn't work when it initially came out in 2005, again, this is based on videos I've seen. I never watched it when I was 4 years old. But a lot of these things were cut out, so a lot of the context is missing from the final version if you watch the theatrical cut, and so it's not as impactful. But I think it was very impactful with all the scenes there in the beginning to work up to that. I think it hits a lot harder. We also meet a character named Lord Tiberius, who was played by Jeremyjahnnsjr, I think. The king is a leper, Edward Norton. What a phenomenal first scene with that character. They play a game of chess, and Baldwin. It's a famous scene. You can see it all over the internet, especially on like Instagram Reels. But he says, basically, people that are higher up than you, that are in charge of you, may try to move you, in whatever direction, like a pawn on the game. But remember, no matter who moves you or why, you cannot say, or that your soul is in your keeping alone. When you face before God, you cannot say that virtue was inconvenient at the time. That will not suffice. Your soul is in your keeping alone, and only then can a man play his own game. I'm butchering it, but it is such a phenomenal scene of dialogue between those two characters. And Edward Norton's performance, I mean, he's wearing a mask throughout the entire film. You could only see his eyes, and yet so much is said through his body language, through his eyes. It's a brilliant performance. It's probably one of Edward Norton's best, and he chose not to be credited for it. Just to do it just like that. Edward Norton is an actor. I admire that so much. I mean, just he's one of the absolute highlights of the entire film. We also get the sentiment of kingdom of conscience or nothing. Sibella is another character we get introduced to, and she very much wants to... She's a sister to the king, and she very much wants Balin, but Balin refuses. Now we reach near the end of the film. Baldwin dies of his leprosy. Oh, before that, there's a really amazing scene with him and Saladin, where they're like, look, if we do this, a lot of us are going to die. I would rather make terms with you now. And then there's this very poignant moment. Saladin looks at Baldwin, and he says, I will send you my physicians, which it's kind of understated, but it's such like a significant thing, because like, this is your enemy, and yet you're willing to provide him medical aid. And then Baldwin, who is a Christ religious man, he offers, a salutation in, I think it's like a Muslim saying. So just like the respect and the reverence between these two people, it's just, it was spectacular. But then he eventually passes away. His nephew is meant to be the next heir. You know what's happening immediately as it happens, but the son is meant to sign this paper. He gets a little bit of candle wax on his arm, but he doesn't react, doesn't say ow, doesn't cry, as if it didn't happen. And you kind of already know it's the case, but then the doctors work on him, they check him out. And the nephew also has leprosy. So it's real sad. And so Sibylla gets very depressed. She gives, the kingdom to this guy that doesn't deserve it. They go to fight the Muslims. They lose. But then, Balin falls back. He goes to defend Jerusalem. But eventually, he puts up a very good fight, but he still loses. Saladin is willing to make terms, and he's promised on his word that Balin and everyone that is within it, the city, can leave unharmed. And so they do. And that's pretty much where the film ends, and back where it all started. Balin returns to his blacksman life, in Christian lands, and the Muslims take back Jerusalem. As I said, it's a very poignant film, and I think the beauty shines through it, regardless if you're religious or not. I think there's a beautiful thing of unity in there. And also, I think my only gripe, but this wouldn't be the first time or the last time that Ridley Scott would do this, but it is very much a sanitizing of the atrocities that the Muslims also committed at that time. That's not to cause any friction with anybody. It is just the Crusades were a bad time for everyone. I'm not picking a side on that. I think Christians did plenty wrong. Right? I'm not defending them just because I am one. I don't know them. And most of them probably did do horrible things. It's a different time. And, but historically, it's one of the few things I looked into a bit more as I was growing up, and it's just not accurate to how they were. I respect the choice, and I prefer the choice for storytelling purposes with, all that. But I believe, with the amount of reverence that Saladin shows, but we have reports of people like pissing on crosses and dragging them around town just to spite them, and that's a bit less kind and respectful and courteous as the movie would have you believe. But again, this is historical fiction. It's not reality, so I don't mind the fact that it's not historically accurate 100%. I think that's something you have to keep in mind with historical fiction, unless it's the author or the director is specifically telling you it is going to be as close to reality as possible. Well, then you have that expectation set in mind, but otherwise I wouldn't put much stock in that. All that to say, I really enjoyed the film though, and I think it's definitely something you should check out. That's pretty much all the time I have for today, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and be kind, be thoughtful, and love one another. Till next time.